Hello everybody, and welcome to the second part of the Ultimate Game Boy Smackdown. We will be putting the Game Boy Color, which was our last episode winner, against the Game Boy Advance SP. Now, the SP is considered the best of the Game Boy line. It is the highest spec, it is the best, it plays all the games, has the nicest screen, nicest size, most portable. So let's see how they stack up. Let's start with dimensions. Now the SP, though it may look kind of chunky today, was actually pretty thin compared to the Game Boy Color. This was it fully opened, whereas with the SP, fully opened was actually very thin. Quick comparison. Now the SP is also taller than the Color, mainly because of this flip cover, and it also has a bigger screen. Now we'll go more into detail with that later, but let's look at the layout. So the select and start buttons are on the bottom of both of them, along with the D-pads and the buttons all in the same spot, just like the previous episode. Now the only difference is that the Game Boy Advance SP has the little brightness button right there, whereas there is none on the Game Boy Color. On the side of the SP, we've got a little volume switch right here, and that's about it. And on the Game Boy Color, not only do we have a link cable port, but we also have volume controls. Now on the Game Boy Color, the power switch was here, and it's also located here on the Game Boy Advance SP. The only difference is there is a power light indicator right here, whereas the indicator is over up here for the Color. Now instead of games on the back like the Color, the SP will put the games in the front, right here. Instead, on the back, there are charging ports, link cables, and 2 new buttons to the Nintendo franchise. Well, especially for handhelds, not necessarily for the main console systems. This is the L button and the R button. You see, the Game Boy Color lacks these buttons, meaning that there's extra functionality with the Game Boy Advance and it can play more games with more specific controls. While we're talking about the games, it should be a good thing to know that the Game Boy Advance plays Game Boy Advance games, as well as original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, though they do kind of pop out. Also, while the Game Boy Color is packed in AA batteries, the Game Boy Advance SP has a little charging port up here, where it can charge up with a rechargeable battery inside. Now let's do a side-by-side comparison. Let's turn this one on, and this one on. Now as you can see, this screen is a lot brighter than the other, and the volume can also be very loud on this one. Now also, what's unique about this comparison is I'm playing the Game Boy Advance version of the original Pokemon games Red and Blue here with Fire Red and Leaf Green, to show a comparison of the software and how much more capable the SP was. Now one thing with SP is that you can toggle the brightness on and off, which you can't do with this, since it does not have a backlit or frontlit screen. And while we're on the topic of backlit and frontlit screens, it'd also be a good thing to say that the Game Boy I have is the Game Boy Advance AGS 001. This one is the one with the single setting frontlit screen. If you really care about that screen and want an even brighter screen, you should probably look for the AGS 101. That model has a backlit screen and can be even brighter than this. Now, one thing with the Game Boy Advance SP is volume and sound. Since the new speakers are louder and are put in the center, it's a much better experience. Whereas the speakers on the Game Boy Color, well, they're much worse in many ways. Mainly because they deteriorate over time to the point where you can barely even hear the console unless you put it up to your ear. Now, since you saw Pokemon Blue on the Color, why not see it on the SP, just for a quick comparison. As you can see, the screen shrinks down to better format itself for the original Pokemon games on the Game Boy Color, since the screen is smaller. Though if you want, you can use the L and R buttons as toggles to switch between a widened format and the original, in case you want to still use full screen. The only problem is, the characters do get a little stretched out. Now overall, I think it's safe to say that the Game Boy Advance SP is most certainly the best Game Boy there is. And though it's not the latest, after it came the Game Boy Micro. It had the same specifications and had the backlit screen of the 101, though it was a lot smaller, and the Game Boy Advance SP was always meant to be the more premium. Next time on Ultimate Smackdown. The Game Boy Advance SP will be facing its younger brother, the DS.